Thank you, Jeremy. Afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Frater. I'm a senior dev on the Fairfax Content API team. And what I'd like to show you this afternoon is this management tool that we've constructed around Elasticsearch, which we've called Capisce. Don't ask me why, you can imagine why. Capisce is intended to really be a kind of content management system for signed queries. And when I talk about signed queries, what I really mean is a pre-canned, possibly very complex Elasticsearch query that can be modified on the fly with runtime parameters that has been signed or approved by one of the administrators. Somebody like Jeremy or myself would probably be involved in doing that. There's various advantages to doing this, and probably the main one is that it abstracts an awful lot of the complexity of running these queries out of the apps that may wish to make use of them. Let's say you're writing a mobile app and you want to consume a whole bunch of Fairfax content and you want to get to the API to use it, but you may not wish to create a whole bunch of really, really complicated JSON to look for the things that you want to look for. You might find that makes your repo complex and difficult to reason about. You might find that unit tests are tricky to write. There's no internet stubbing involved, all those sorts of things. Also, the complexity involved in generating the JSON might result in lots of extra CPU cycles, device memory, not to mention the extra bandwidth involved in shuttling these big chunks of JSON back and forth across the internet. It's also better from a safe perspective. It means they're able to maintain control over exactly what kind of query is running against their indices, and we can stop them if they're getting out of control or the resulting in degraded performance or whatever. And all of that revolves around Capisce. So the easiest way to show it working is just to log into the thing and get started. So one thing to bear in mind is that Capisce is an absolutely brand new system, and therefore there's only 2 queries in it currently. Hopefully that's going to fill up rather quickly as we start adding new features and new clients starting to use this stuff. Each one of these amounts to a pre-canned search that can be run against the index. And I'll show you how a little bit later on. But without any further ado, if I go into the details of one of these queries, you can see that each one has a name, which is really just a reference to the person who created the query or the administrator who needs to approve or reject it. An API key, which is selectable from a list. The API key is actually used for authentication further down the track in the API, itself. We have the search index, which logically enough is actually the Elasticsearch index or indices, indeed, that we wish to search against. We have an asset type, which in this case is venue. And then finally, we have the actual JSON that we intend to run against the Elasticsearch index. If I zoom into this, what you'll see is that this is pretty much a standard Elasticsearch JSON with perhaps one slightly unusual exception here, which is this pattern. Basically what this indicates here is that you have a runtime parameter. The best way of demonstrating that is to show you the preview functionality. The idea is that Capisce can preview these things against Elasticsearch without actually making the query itself in the API. So if I click preview, it's correctly detected that I have a runtime parameter called statebox, and I will fill that with whatever value is appropriate. Let's say New South Wales. The preview, and Capisce will talk directly to the Elasticsearch index and bring me back the results. So as an administrator, I can determine how long the query took, how many hits I got, whether all the shards work correctly, essentially whether or not the query is performant, acceptable, and whether or not it's going to bring results back that the application developer actually needs. I can add as many of those as I want to. The way it works in practice from the application's point of view is the application doesn't really need to know any of this information. It just needs to know the UID of the query, the API key, and it needs to provide any runtime parameters that need to be applied to it at runtime. The way that works is, if I was to hit that same endpoint with the GET request instead, there we go, I get exactly the same results back. And here's my runtime parameter, which I've substituted, just to demonstrate this isn't actually pre-canned and that it really is live. If I change that to, say, Tas for Tasmania, I'll get 2 results back instead of 2100. But that's how it works in practice. So if I'm the application developer, I don't have to manufacture complex JSON or anything like that to get results back. I just need to know the UID of the query, I need to be given a valid API key, and I need my runtime parameters. And that's really about it. That's all I need to bring this information back and start working with it. Now, obviously, because this contacts Elasticsearch directly, if I mistype things, let's say I have a character on the end of venue, I preview that. Now that is going to bring me an empty data set back because there's no asset type called venueh. Likewise, if I get my search index wrong, there's an incorrect character in there or something like that, if I then preview that, I'm going to get an error back. And that's reflected, as you can see, in the Capisce UI, because it simply doesn't know how to process that query. So an awful lot of things can be determined about how the API is going to be used before it's actually used in anger. The other thing, if I'm an administrator, that I can do with these various queries is I can approve and reject them. This one, as you can see, already has a status of approved, which means it's ready to be used by any app developer who knows the API key, who knows the UID of the query, and has a relevant API key. However, if I'm an administrator, I may decide that that query is really too slow, it degrades the performance of the Elasticsearch index across other applications, or for some reason it's unsafe. In which case, I can reject it. What happens now, if I attempt to run that same query, is I'll get back query not found under 404. So yeah, obviously it's quite easy to manage in that way. I can unpublish them as quickly as I can publish them. If I wish to bring it back to life, I have to go through 2 steps. I have to go to revive, which puts it back in the list of queries that need approving, modifying before they're approved. And then, of course, as you can see, it's in a revived state, it's still not available. So Capisce really is the source of truth for this information. If I approve it, it goes back into the API, and once again, it's available for use. But just to demonstrate that we really do have this right, if I was to change my API key, then I'm going to get query not found. So it really is quite secure in that way. It's hard to get wrong. And really that's our take on signed queries. That's our take on query templating and runtime parameter substitution and things like that. And hopefully what this is going to do in the near future is make it much easier for website developers, application developers, internal people within the Fairfax organization to utilize and consume the content that all turns up in Elasticsearch. And that's about it. Thank you very much.